Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I did go ahead and record this meeting so we can share it with our other members on our social media and on our website for others to share in this information. So we appreciate you joining us today. We will go around and do quick introductions in just a moment, but my name is Christie Bruner. I am the Vice President of Advocacy here at the St. Pete Chamber. And we'll go to John first.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Learn. I am the Government Relations Manager at Baycare Health System, St. Anthony's Hospital in St. Pete. I lead our federal advocacy, but I'm also the Legislative Committee Chair for the Chamber here.
Wonderful. And John will give us all our great information today, but we'll go around robin. And if you could introduce yourself, your name and your organization. I see Alex on here first.
Hi, I'm Alex here, Marco. I'm Bella. And we work at Great Explorations Children's Museum, and we're excited to be here.
Wonderful. And what is your role there, Alex and Bella?
I'm the development manager, and Bella is the development specialist.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And as we're going through, if any of the organizations on the call today have specific bills you're watching, appropriations you're tracking, information that we can help you out with, please hold on to that, and we'll definitely want to address that as we go through. Kip, I know you're driving. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. I'm at a light. So I'm Kip Corvo. I'm with First Contact. We operate the 211 and 98 call centers.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Kip. And Darden.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Darden Rice. I'm the Chief Planning and Community Affairs Officer for PSTA.
Wonderful. Thanks for joining us. Lenny's here.
Hi, everyone. I am the Leadership and Advocacy Coordinator here at the Chamber.
Excellent. Thanks, Lenny. And Patrick.
Hear me okay?
Oh, can you hear me? Hello, Patrick. Oh, I cannot hear you, Patrick. That's all right. While he's thinking of that, Patrick is our public policy chair, and he is with Trenum Law. So hopefully he can log in and share that in just a moment.
Can you hear me now?
Yay, you're in.
I got a new laptop through my work and all the settings were thrown off. So I'm trying to do technology, which is always a dangerous thing, but you already handled it. So I think we're good to go.
Thanks, Patrick. Dave.
Hi, Dave Billardello. I'm with Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, and I am the Vice President of Government Affairs.
Wonderful. Welcome. Bob Warcola.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Warcola. I'm with Shoemaker Loop and Kendrick.
Welcome. Mila.
Hi, how are you? I'm Mila Turtle with VAMT, and I'm also the Vice Chair of the St. Pete Arts Alliance here in St. Pete.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank
All right,
you.
David.
Hi, everybody. David Thompson, Director of Government Affairs for the City of St. Pete, and actually driving up to Tallahassee right now. So thanks for making this virtual, Christy.
No problem. I just knew you'd be in the car with nothing to do. So this is perfect. Well, drive safe, please. Wilma.
Hi, I'm Wilma Norton. I'm Vice President of the Community Foundation Tampa Bay.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Demetris.
Good afternoon, Demetris Miller with FIS. I am here as part of the Leadership St. Pete class of 2025, just sitting in on behalf of our team lead, Ms. Pavita Samuel.
Oh, good. Thanks for joining us, Demetris. Appreciate it. And I know you guys are going to Tallahassee next week, right?
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
All right. We got the St. Pete train going all the different times. It's perfect. Thanks for representing. And Tanya.
Hi there, Tanya Gramatsky. I, like Demetris, am also, I'm sorry, my camera's not working. There we go. I, like Demetris, am part of the Leadership St. Pete class, also sitting in for Pavita in advance of her Tallahassee trip.
Oh, great. And please let us know if you guys have any questions or anything we can help you out with after we've.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Chris Steinacher is here.
Hello, I'm Chris Steinacher, President and CEO of the St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for everybody attending. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, Christy and Lenny, for organizing it, and John for leading it.
Of course, of course. All right, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our chair, John.
All right, and I think I'm sharing my PowerPoint now.
Yep.
Awesome. So just a little bit to go over. Of course, I'm John Learn, your legislative committee chair. And I don't think David Garcia joined us today, but he's with Spectrum Charter Communications. He's our vice chair for the committee. So kind of orienting ourselves, looking at some of the top lines. And please, folks, jump in with questions, comments, as collaborative as possible. You know, I rely on y'all to sort of orient us on what we should be caring about, what you want us to be in tune with. So to that extent, please don't hesitate to jump in. So today's day 21 of session, start of week 4. It is moving rather quickly, but I feel like we say that every year. Prior to session, we talked about the presiding officers being concerned about sort of the fiscal state of Florida, revenue projections going down, potentially a recession, a budget deficit in Florida from the next 3 to 5 years. They got some good news at the start of last week where the state economists actually projected an increase in projections. So they picked up about 1.3 billion over the next 2 fiscal years that they project, right? So anything could happen. The state's chief economist still said, look, there's a lot of economic uncertainty. There are headwinds that could be impacting us. And the main thing that really actually caused the increase in projections was continued strong sales tax. So despite some of the things consumers are saying and the inflationary effects, et cetera, consumers are still buying things and the state's still collecting a healthy amount of sales tax. So that's what's driving this increased projection. So that's something that's actually probably helpful for us for a lot of the appropriate projects too. It makes it a little bit more difficult for them to be maybe as fiscally conservative as they would like to be, but I still think it'll be a leaner budget year than before. We are hearing, initially they wanted to get the budgets out really early. And sort of the reason for that is if they get the budgets to the governor, or the budget, I should say, both chambers, pass it, send it to the governor. If they get it to him during session, he has a truncated time period to sign anything he has while they're in session. Typically what they'll do is they'll send it to him and gavel out. So session not ongoing, he can take as long as he wants with it. That's when he undergoes that process and really takes his time with vetoes, et cetera. So they were really pushing to be ahead of schedule. Really kind of, it seems like now they're just on normal cadence. So either budgets are going to, preliminary budgets out of either chamber will drop this week, maybe early next at the latest. But right now, if you have an appro project that you're working on or an affiliated organization is working on, you should be checking in with your members now that carry those projects and saying, hey, thank you again for the support, for carrying this. It means so much to me. I hope, you're doing everything you can on it, something to that effect. Because right now is when their chairs in each of the individual silos will be constructing their budgets. And if you're not on that first budget, it's really hard to get in play later in session. So that's kind of the budget side of things. They're really ramping up and doing some session on the floor in each chamber. The Senate President priority, the rural renaissance package. Obviously, the Senate President's from Wauchula, from the middle of the state. He, citrus farmer by trade, cares a lot about rural communities, the communities that have declining tax revenues, declining populations. This legislation's got a $200 million appropriation attached to it, or $200 million in funds, and it establishes the Office of Rural Prosperity, some other stuff there. That's his big number one thing, passed unanimously in the Senate. It's on its way over to the House. It might go through one committee there and then get voted on the floor, but I would expect that to pass in short order. On the House side of things, we talked a little bit about vetoes from the governor. In February during the special session, you saw the House for the first time since, Charlie Crist's independent days overturn a veto in the budget this way. So the House did that. The Senate, followed suit. The House has these work groups they created after this kind of tiff with the governor to look at in each of the silos. You talk about healthcare, you talk about arts and cultural funding, you talk about water projects, et cetera, to look at some of the vetoes that have come from the governor over the past year and, assess, do we think these are needed? What's the return on investment, some of that stuff. So they've got about 5 million predominantly in water infrastructure projects that they're slated to look and see if they can overturn those vetoes. So that's something interesting to monitor. So that's kind of the readout right now on session in Tallahassee. We'll go into some bills in a second, but just top lines looking at what's going on in DC. Not last week, but the week before, they finally funded the federal government through the end of this fiscal year. It's kind of a standoff between the House, passing something I think a lot of folks didn't think they would necessarily pass, and then you've got Minority Leader Chuck Schumer put himself in a tough spot by saying they were going to oppose, and then the Dems ultimately voted to pass it. Ultimately, I think there were concerns from Democrats that if the government were to shut down, what that would look like in terms of some of the DOGE cuts, and giving the president, when the government shuts down, the president has the ability to decide who's essential and who's non-essential for federal workers, and being able, kind of in the state where a lot of workers have been getting laid off and jobs have been getting cut from the federal workforce, the president being able to unilaterally decide those positions, and then ultimately the president's the one, when the government reopens, who decides when those folks come back to work. So ultimately it could have been a situation where the government shuts down, the president deems XYZ non-essential workers, and then never calls them back, essentially firing them. So I think Democrats were in a really tough spot. The big surprise, though, was that the House majority with 3-seat margin passed a government funding bill where you've got Republicans that are strong fiscal Republicans that have never voted to fund the government, that are philosophically opposed to how big it is, et cetera. They've never voted for a government funding bill, period. They just don't. The speakers had to rely on Democrats the last 3 times they've done this, but this time it was a party line vote, one Republican voting against, but otherwise it passed. So I think that was the big shock. They're still working on some nominees for the president. I think Dr. Oz is going to be later this week on Thursday. I thought I saw this morning to lead the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. There are a couple others, they're still working to push those through. So that's taken up some bandwidth in the Senate. The big thing everyone's talking about is the digging up all my time and my job, but reconciliation. And just real quick on reconciliation, that's a kind of an arcane process, but ultimately it's being used to get around that filibuster threshold in the Senate. The U.S. Senate has a 60-vote threshold for most legislation to get passed through, not a simple majority. So for some of this, controversial stuff that can pass that simple majority in the House, it would never pass, that 60-vote threshold in the Senate, of course, with Republicans having a 53-seat majority over there. So in this reconciliation process, you've got the House with their large bill that seeks to kind of do everything they want to do. It's got like a $4.5 trillion fiscal attached in those tax cuts, right? So money they're removing from the budget, and then some other cuts to kind of be the offset. And then the Senate's got one package right now, and they're kind of the backup plan if they can't get that big House bill passed, where they're going to work on some border stuff, some defense spending, some, getting rid of some Biden era energy policy. And we'll see kind of the dynamic over the rest of the year, how this is going to unfold. Are there going to be deep Medicaid cuts? Are there going to be SNAP cuts? Some of those sort of things that have taken up a lot of the airwaves lately. Let me go to the next slide. I don't know if anybody has any questions or we want to talk about any of the federal or state stuff we just talked about. All right, moving on. Some bills, and these are a couple of bills we actually talked about in Tallahassee a couple of weeks ago. SB 349 would, remove the state preemption on hoisting equipment, crane bill. So actually when we met with Representative, she kind of let us know it's going to be a little too early for this to pass this year, but it is positive in the sense that, some of the building industry is coming to the table. Some of these conversations are happening. The Senate bill passed one committee, but it hasn't moved since. That House bill hasn't moved at all, and it's just a repealer bill as well. So, I don't think this is something that'll pass this year, but I do think it's the start of a fruitful conversation there. That's kind of what Rep. Cross told us, that, come back next year and continue this conversation. Another bill kind of...
John, I'm sorry. Could I jump in on that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I did want to just flag on that. So everything you said is absolutely correct. The one addition that we had developed late last week in our communications between the reps is when that bill went through the Senate side, Senator Rousseau was asked to work with the industry on finding some compromise language. So our folks had a meeting with him, his staff, ABC and the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And so HB 1535, I believe is what it is, 1535 or 1539. It's an emergency bill in the House. It has some Crane language that we are supportive of, and Senator Roussan is considering if he wants to work on that on the Senate side. So just wanted to share that update. Is there's another bill that does have that language in it, but it actually sets up regulations at the state level as opposed to repealing the preemption there. Just wanted to flag that.
Okay, so it'd be a state standard for that crane equipment, not a local government decides. Okay. Yeah, that bill is actually, that's helpful to know, David. That bill is actually the companion bill for Senator DeSegle's like hurricane emergency preparedness bill. So that's going to pass. So
His version doesn't have the Crane language. So I think that's something Senator Roussan is having that conversation about, if that's appropriate.
Okay, that's good to understand. Thank you, David. On another kind of hurricane related bill, operating motor vehicles at slow speeds. This is something that's carried by Senator DeSegle, Rep. Cross. Moved through its first committees in both chambers. It's got 2 hearings left in each chamber. I think we'd really be looking for this maybe to get incorporated into a larger transportation package. I think there were some questions from law enforcement on making it more uniform. Those have been resolved. Sounds like this is something that's going to go, if not these bills getting passed, maybe incorporated into transportation package. A couple things just wanted to flag that I had seen on workforce kind of, the first one is really on the education scholarships. They expanded significantly in the last couple of years at the state level, making it a lot easier for folks to get vouchers to choose where they'd like to go to school. So that, has had a large fiscal attached when they did away with that income threshold and opened it up to more Florida families. So one of the things they've been talking about to maybe track the use of those and the growth of the spend there is better transparency and auditing, especially when kids are moving from different schools during the year, making sure those dollars are actually going to the school that the child is at. So that's something that's a committee bill. It'll get heard later this week. And then more on the workforce front, there's this program which I had no idea existed. I'd be curious if anyone in the group here is familiar with it, but essentially a money back guarantee program that exists currently at Florida college system institutions and school districts, where for 3 programs right now, and the example that I was, it was respiratory therapy, nursing, and there was another one, can't remember, they were all healthcare. So interestingly enough, but these programs, if you're not able within 6 months after graduation to find a job in that field, then you're eligible through the school to pursue your money back as a way to kind of incentivize kids or, or anybody really to go to these institutions or through their school district to do dual enrollment and pursue some of these different programs to get straight into the workforce. So right now that only exists for 3 programs, or each school only has to do 3 programs for that. They're expanding it to 6. Reason being, in that committee, they talked about nobody's actually gone back for a refund. They don't know if that's because the schools aren't providing the information in the right way, if they're not helping them submit for that refund or that money back guarantee, or what. So they're trying to open that up a little bit to really incentivize people to go for some of these career and technical positions, go to school. And if, you can't find a job in these fields, we know we know that jobs are out there. We know that people are needed, then you'll get your money back on tuition, et cetera. So that's an interesting one that's starting to move too.
Hey, John, did you see if there was any language for the colleges to get resources to administer that?
Yeah, no, I don't know that it might be unfunded, but the onus is on the colleges to help with that process, but I'm not sure if they're funded to facilitate. But that's something I can look at.
Well, because we had met with Dr. Williams, and she had touted that program as very exciting, but she in St. Pete College has 50 different people that are following up with every graduate so that they don't have to pay back the tuition. So they really, it's a man-on-man coverage kind of thing. So they're talking to each graduate, who have you interviewed with, here's some other ones. And so they're really having to, what they call, navigate that resource. And it's worked, but it's become a huge undertaking to continue to do it. So I just see them doubling it. That's a lot more people, but That's cool.
No, that's a good point too. And they talked about the numbers in the program not being as high, like kids that know and are opting into this. So I think that's part of it. And then when you double it to 6, you double the programs, more people interested, more visibility on it. I think that'll be a problem for the schools to fund the positions to, check on all the job openings and that sort of thing. That's a good flag. I can look more into that.
Yes, yeah. Dr. Williams really it matters to her when I was with her recently.
Yeah. Do you know off the top of your head what SBC programs those are?
No, I don't, not off the top of my head, but she said it in the meeting. I have my notes somewhere, but I don't have it on my head.
No worries. I'd just be curious to see what in our region we think is because I think the one I had seen was Florida Southwest College, and those were all healthcare. So I thought that was interesting. Like being in healthcare, I know we can, we have an opening in every single type of position across our organization. So I know that's an area. There's no way there would ever be a refund from the state because there's just so much need across Florida for healthcare. So I'd be curious what in SBC's identified kind of to fill that need.
That's a good question. I'll find that out too. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That's interesting.
Another one, and David, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I'm sure you'll be talking about it this week. Right now, if the state, or if a local government or another state entity has a personal injury lawsuit against it, there's some wrongdoing on the government side here. There's sovereign immunity limit right now of 200,000 maximum that somebody could get from a lawsuit by the court right now. 200,000, and they're looking at increasing that up to $1 million per person, and from 300,000 per incident to 3 million total for those incidents. Reason being, right now, if that happens and a jury finds a settlement of X amount in excess of these, you have to go to the state legislature and get a claims bill passed so that the state of Florida will allow that money to go from that local government to you. So this is something that's been around. I mean, they've been talking about this since I've been going up to Tallahassee, but even longer. I want to say this has been, constantly talked about. These numbers don't make sense anymore. There's been a push to have it at least track with the consumer price index, so it's tracking a little bit more with inflation. All that being said, if this comes up and claims bills don't have to go to Tallahassee anymore, and these amounts are increased from 200,000 to $1 million and 300,000 to 3 million, obviously that's going to have an impact on local governments' checkbooks, right? Seeing that. So it's moving in the House, hasn't moved in the Senate yet, but I do think this is something the speaker's been a little bit stronger on some of these items. I don't know, David, if you're hearing anything or if you have any input on that.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, this is one that's been a recurring conversation, and I think, anybody who's looking at it objectively can say the when the caps on liability were set, things are more expensive, needs are different. So I think it got really close to passing last year. My recollection was that the House and the Senate couldn't agree on what the new cap should be. So I think we'll just be keeping an eye and we'll see what those sovereign immunity limits are.
No, it's helpful. Yeah, it did get close last year, and it's just been something that's continuing. It kind of reminds me of another one related to MedMal that we're working on and has gotten close the last few years. It'll be interesting to see if it goes all the way this time. All right, and then we talked about this emergency preparedness and response bill. Prohibits really focus on a period after disaster, prohibits that increase on permitting fees from local governments. Some of those other burdens, like they can't come out with more comprehensive or restrictive comprehensive plans in areas that have had a disaster, that sort of stuff. This is sponsored by Senator DeSegle. I think the House bill is Rep. McFarland, and that is the House bill, David, that you referenced, 1535. That has the Crane language, that's kind of that compromise language. So it'll be interesting to see if that gets into this Senate bill here. The House bill's only moved through one committee so far. The Senate bill's moved through one, but it only has appropriations left, so there's still plenty of time there. And one thing real quick before we talk about the ADU bill below, we're hearing that at the end of next week is going to be the last week for subcommittees. So unless it's a larger committee, rules, appropriations, judiciary, it's one of the first stop committees. If it hasn't been heard in that committee by the end of next week, a bill is going to be dead unless, for some reason a presiding officer wants to remove some of those bill or those committee references from it. But if it's got 3 references and hasn't moved to that first committee, at the very least, by the end of next week, I would say it's safe to say that bill is not passing. It's not going anywhere unless, somebody really important like the speaker or the president cares about it for one reason or another. But you would say if they did, it would have, already moved past that point. So bills will start dying here soon. And then looking real quick, this is another bill we talked about, specifically Chad from the committee. The Housing Committee wanted to speak a little bit about this because they're doing so much in his industry for ADUs, but this would require local governments to adopt an ordinance to actually allow the ADUs. Had a good conversation with the House sponsor, Rep. Connerly. It's passed 1 committee in the House. It's passed 2 actually in the Senate. And we were having a little discussion before the meeting kicked off about those parking requirements. Right now, the bill does not have an additional parking requirement that some of the municipalities do have to have these ADUs built on a property. And there was a little bit more discussion too on manufactured homes, but we did see that manufactured homes would be allowable to be an ADU as well. So,
David, I was just going to ask David. I know the city, I think, was opposed to the parking mandate part of the ADU bill. Is that something that you're still talking about?
Yeah, so we have a pretty broad ADU ordinance, but we do require an additional spot. So I would say that would be a concern. And this is, I think this is just, I'm thinking of the different pieces of it, but I think the parking conversation is very much a live question. Knowing that public transportation has to go hand in hand with any parking reduction minimums, and the county, I should say, hasn't seen the progress that we would like to on public transportation. Darden can talk about it all day. She has to deal with a lot of that pushback. And so I think that's going to be an open question. I say ongoing concern is what I should say. An ongoing concern for the city is for these types of things, and the broader. I'm sure John will talk about it, but the other Live Local 3.0, as I think of it, bill that also really puts back any parking requirements.
Yeah, I think that was very diplomatic of you, David. Ongoing discussions. I think what Chad's perspective he had shared on the parking was that all the parking that's being put in, he's never seen it be utilized. I don't know if Chris or Christie has anything else to add to that, but he said, it's being required, but it's not, being utilized at what he's seen in St. Pete.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting and kind of a real reality check. I mean, I know how important it is to our neighbors in all the neighborhoods that we talked about parking. So I'm just curious if I don't believe I believe it'll pass without the parking, and it's just, do cities like ours have to, does it blanket, does it change? I mean, is ours grandfathered in or any of that kind of stuff is what I still can't get a clear answer on. Has anybody clear on, can they touch our stuff if they do this one?
I'll have to double check this, but I think the language was that not that it preempted existing parking, but that this did not require parking as a part of the state level. But I'll look and see to confirm for you.
I didn't know if sometimes you can, that it doesn't allow you to do anything else, become more restrictive than what the state's done. But if you've already got something grandfathered in, I just didn't know if that was one of those kind of cases.
Yeah, I can look at that, but that's a good flag. And then this is the last slide I think I did on budget, and this is what came from Christie. So if you have an appropriation in, when we see those offers come out, what I'll do is I'll take these projects and I'll go through the budget in both chambers, and we'll see, okay, where are some of the things we care about here locally? Where are they in each chamber, so we can track and advocate a little bit more targeted on those. So if you have an appropriation, your organization does, or someone else let us know, something we can add to the list, and we can at least track it and keep everybody in the loop on that. And David, I think we got the ones from the city too. Yeah, I see Williams Park. You guys are going for the ferry dock again this year or next year?
Most likely next year. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. That's
I'll
all I
send
had
you
for.
our list of projects for this year.
Awesome. I know you'll be tracking it, so I can just get the
Yeah.
I can get out what the status is, what we need to do. All right, that's all I had prepared. Happy to have conversation on anything else. If anybody has questions.
I have a question. I'm sorry. I'm looking for where to raise my hand and I don't see it. But I thought it would be good if we could recapture the top line takeaways from our meetings with FDOT Secretary Perdue, because there were two, I think, at least two relevant pieces of information that were conveyed in no uncertain terms regarding highway capacity issues. I heard a very strong statement about 175, and I want anyone else to jump in that might have a better memory than I do, but I thought in one part was a strong statement that FDOT is not really looking keenly on any project that would reduce highway capacity. And then I think they further added that they were, if anything, looking at building more roads, more support for waterborne transit, more things, but not less.
Gosh,
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, John.
No, I was gonna say I wasn't in the meeting, so I need someone else to.
I thought I did. Okay, yeah. So Darden, I agree with you. What I heard, the third thing I heard was, hey, we've got a new secretary in our district, so we should probably have that person invited to one of our next transportation meetings. And we got to say goodbye and thank you to David leaving us as our secretary, who I really do believe did a lot for us and created that mentality that Darden just mentioned. I don't believe they want to do anything to harm us right now as far as reducing capacity. So I think that was heard loud and clear. They are open to, hey, if there's ways to make it easier to get underneath it or whatever, or around it, they want to be partners in it. They want to be at the table. But at this point, they kind of got really into that part of the conversation, and I was really impressed with their commitment to us all about what they see in that. But I found it, and then they didn't dissuade us to get off the ferry systems thing, or to they talked about systems and how important they were, Darden. So I heard all that exactly as well.
Yeah, and I was there too, and I know several others were there. Yeah, pretty much what you said as far as 175, but none of that was binding. That was all just a comment made by the secretary. So I don't, it's like they could change their mind depending on what comes out of these studies. So I don't think it closes the door, but he pretty much made his feelings pretty well known. That I think what he's trying to do is expand capacity across the state and all the projects. And then when he hears a possible project that could reduce capacity, it was just like a no-go for him. That's what I said.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, can I just add one more comment? I unfortunately had to be on I-4 on Thursday and Friday going to Orlando and back. And oh my God, if we don't have a major problem between the two largest, the fastest growing markets in our state. And, when I was at the partnership, we used to work really closely to make sure those markets can do business together. But my God, that was 2.5 hours both times going there and back. And that's a capacity problem. It's just huge.
I wasn't at the meeting, unfortunately, but I spoke to 3 or 4 people who were there and who said they heard the same thing. And I think it's probably a good thing to have that backing, given the position that the chamber has already taken on this issue, that we don't want to back anything that reduces capacity. And just to echo what Chris said, but even bring it into our backyard, if you've ever driven down 275 in rush hour right now, heading north, it's a parking lot. And I know a lot of people who use 175 and 375 as an offshoot to avoid those issues. And it's only going to get worse with all the development going on. So I took it as a welcome sign. I think it's something that, supports the position we've already taken as a chamber, and it solidifies the position we've already taken as a chamber, which is, look, we're open to listening to ways to improve connectivity, but you can't be removing highway access to a city that's growing as fast as St. Pete is.
Can I touch on one other? I think David was referencing the House Bill 943. John, I think that was some of the info that I sent you for Florida League of Cities. And David, is that the one that includes the cities supporting the Yes in God's Backyard and has some of the parking mandates as well?
Yes, 943 does have the Yes in God's Backyard legislation, but it also has a million other things that we're concerned about. I don't know if you were asking me to go into those, if you were going to discuss them, but yeah, so that one is, I think this is one of those bills where it's the same thing with the parking requirements is the state wants to do something and we as a community have to decide if that's the kind of policies we want. The big overarching thing is that this would allow live local projects and significantly restrict the ability of the city to do or to have any meaningful oversight on that project in a way that I would say that level of expansion is pretty unprecedented. That in the bill are, you could do these projects on anything that is zoned for a triplex or higher. You could do any of these projects in a zone. So right now it's commercial or industrial is where these live local projects can happen, but it adds any zoning category that includes commercial or industrial as a subcomponent. So any zoning area that it's mostly housing, but you could do a small retail business that opens up the whole zone to it. We really don't have a lot of planned development in St. Pete just based on our size, but you would really look at a very, very large set of projects. And the other piece of this is I wouldn't say St. Pete falls in this category by any means, but a lot of municipalities and counties have gone and tried to find as many ways as possible to get around doing these types of projects in their county. They've opted out of having any of the apartments built. They put building moratoriums in, all these different types of things. And in response to that, the state is saying, no, there is a housing crisis. We are going to take away every rule that every tool that you have to slow these down because you all are not operating within the spirit of the law. And that, to me, is the reasoning behind the provision that creates that allows entities to sue a local government for delaying the construction of affordable housing, because they really are, the tone from this is you all have tried to get out of doing these projects. That's not going to happen. We are going to push the boundaries on what areas are possible to build in and even further restrict your ways to get away from them. And I'll also tie this in just to go with SB 180 and a similar speed is that in the House version 1535, that the current language, and there's been some amendments that have been filed, but that language states that if you have come within 100 miles of a hurricane, the hurricane track, you cannot enact any development regulations that are more restrictive for 2 years. And if you think about that, I can pretty much guarantee that in a 2-year period, St. Pete would come within 100 miles of a hurricane. So that's almost a permanent preemption on us being able to reduce zoning. And if any of you are involved in some of this, you know that the city is looking at doing some major looks at land development regulations since we haven't done a big overhaul in 8 years. But the way that the bill is drafted, we wouldn't have been able to make any changes to our zoning and ordinances dating back from Hurricane Irma. That's how far, if you count that 2-year waiting period, that's how far in recent memory that 2 years within 100 miles of a hurricane would be.
So David, on SB 180, then if the crane language gets included, are you guys just kind of standing to the side? Like how does that still against?
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to do the double speak isn't the right word I want to use here, but be honest, say, hey, this would be a negative impact. And something we're gonna talk about this week with Senator DeSigli is, you know, what can we do to tighten that framework? You know, the last time they did a bill like this for Hurricane Ian, it was 100 miles from impact. That to us is a much more reasonable standard for restrictive than 100 miles from the track of the storm while it is designated as a hurricane. So we'll be having those conversations.
Yeah, I just wonder if he's getting at sort of the Milton impact that, like, I saw where I live, where Milton flooded up, but we weren't, necessarily within impact, but 100 miles within track for sure.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. And then on the on HB 943, y'all are obviously against, I think League of Citizens too, but just confirming that.
Yeah, I don't want to say like to come out and say wholeheartedly against the bill, because there are, I mean, it's, for example, is like the League of Cities. So we had this conversation of them. They they were on board with our original language for the Yes in God's Backyard because it was permissive. This bill is mandatory, makes local governments do it. Now, we as a city already wanted to do those projects, so making it mandatory isn't really an issue for us. But I think it's a mix of, whether or not we would do this bill, like some of these projects anyway, versus like, okay, this is requiring it and it's broader. So I think we're still trying to piece through and kind of identify which ones do we think are further, but we're not against, the bill as a general concept, but some of them are going to be like, yeah, that's probably a bit too far for the community. Like the parking is one of them. I don't know if you all saw recently, Fox 13 did a story about, it's actually my apartment complex, where the developer got a credit to do less parking because they're doing affordable and workforce housing. But now they've run out of parking completely in the complex and they're having to modify leases. And so that was one of the things, like the vision for the apartment complex is that people would travel to downtown using public transportation, but that's just not where the residents are at this point. And so whether or not you want to get there, if we don't have the support, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to do it, it's hard to say it's a good idea for the community to get rid of all these parking if we don't actually have a viable alternative at this point.
Yeah, no, that's thank you for flagging that. I'll have to look at the article, but I think it's a really good point you make.
John, I was going to bring up one other bill that Mila had talked about that was of concern for Arts Alliance, HB 665, for the local impact fees, which David might be able to help clarify too. And I know that would preempt municipalities from mandating that developers provide local art or contribute to local art funding. And Mila, I'll ask you, from the Arts Alliance perspective, are they thinking that, because right now we do not have a mandate, we just have an opportunity for an incentive for developers. So
Okay. Well, WADA actually brought this to our attention. I'm not sure how it slipped off our radar, but we were advocating through Ryan Griffin, who is our chair and knows a lot of developers. We were advocating for more public art and public art funding in light of kind of what the government's doing in general. And we were very surprised to hear about the proposal of this bill. And we kind of learned about it a little bit too late to advocate the way we wanted to. I did talk to Lindsay Cross, and you brought up that you looked at the vote, and she did vote no on it. But I believe that it's when it moves forward, we get another chance to advocate against it. But the concern is that that's taken away from us, and WADA is very against it. I just brought it to the attention of St. Pete Arts Alliance, so I haven't been able to have a thoughtful discussion. I know Paul Carter, myself, and Ryan Griffin are against it. But I can't speak totally for the Arts Alliance at large, but I would assume so because that is a hot topic for us.
Yeah.
David, can you help us? Go ahead.
So I was going to say, yeah, so Celeste and I actually just talked about this bill before I headed up, and we'd been following it. Obviously, it's sponsored by Senator DeSigley.
Right.
But what background that we got is that, as things often are, this is actually really an issue with South Florida, where they're in the eyes of the legislature, the amount that developers were being charged was so high that it felt like that it wasn't, it's something the legislature was going to accept. We'll be meeting with Senator DeSigley this week. My thought process on this is, and I thought it was mandatory, so I might be wrong about that, Christy. But the most a developer in St. Pete would have to pay is $50,000 if their project is more than $1 million, and that's like basically less than 5%. We think that's pretty reasonable. So our pitch would be, can we get a percentage or a number close to what we have now, as opposed to eliminating it entirely? So we'll certainly update the group when we hear back about that. Because I don't know what the number that these like South Florida municipalities were charging that got them on the radar to begin with.
This is Patrick. This is in regard to construction and development, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, we may want to talk to Power Design about this, because I know they're a big chamber supporter. I know that they were they're a client of mine. I know that they were actually pushing for this legislation because of what was happening in South Florida, and because of some of the restrictions that were being imposed on them for the pay that they had to make. That was just, from what I understand, just astronomical. That would make things almost impossible to comply with. So I do think it is a South Florida issue. And I think that there probably could be some ways to massage this a little bit, but I think they are a good partner of the chamber, and it would be someone worth speaking to get their perspective, because I know they're the ones that are being impacted by this a lot.
Yeah.
At Power Design, do you recommend?
I can make a couple of intros. I know a couple of people over there, including your GC. He's a good friend of mine. So
yeah, we'll connect you guys,
Patrick, we're meeting with Senator DeSigley at 3 tomorrow. So if you would be able to connect myself and whoever you think would be a good person on their side to chat with, that can give us a little context before we go into that meeting.
Okay, I'll do my best.
Okay, and as far as WADA bringing it to our attention, it was Mark Ailing and Robert Capusta that were very concerned about the bill, which I'm sure you all know both of them. If you wanted to get their perspective, they brought it to our attention.
Awesome. Thank you, Mila. Thank you, David, for that clarification as well. And we'll get all those contacts to everybody. For the good of the order, anybody else from their organization have anything to contribute or questions for our expert, John Learn? And I wanted to also give a shout out to David for knowing all of those bill numbers off the top of his head as he's driving the road.
Yeah.
I will tell your boss you're doing a good job.
Well, I know you talked about it at the beginning, John, and Christy, I agree with you. John's doing a great job, and everybody, and David and everybody. But I do think it was funny when we were up there 2 weeks ago, how they just had that presentation about how the state's going to be hurting for money and shit's going to hit the fan and everybody tighten up, and that was the message. And we all looked at each other like, how is a state like ours? How does that? I would have projected more revenue coming in with the sales revenue keys, and then so. I don't know if that. I just think it's kind of wild that 2 weeks later, like, oh yeah, you're right. We checked the math. We're gonna be
well, I think so. They do monthly revenue, reports where they see, okay, what did we collect in sales tax, and then they'll adjust their longer range financial outlooks from there. I know that what Speaker Perez talks a lot about is the 3 to 5 years what had that deficit ahead. So this $1 billion bump comes over the next 2 years. So I think, I don't think in 3 years that we'll have a deficit in Florida. I think that's why he's bringing some of this austerity to the table too. So he wants to just avoid it altogether. But you know, it's 3 years, 5 years in the future is what they've talked about. I don't know if they're expecting a true recession like a lot of folks have talked about, and that's what's going to drive it. But I think like the big thing, people moving here, the sales tax and then the dock stamp tax are going to continue to drive insane sales tax revenue, right? Well, when things cost more with inflation, you collect more in sales tax. Right? So that's pretty basic, but I don't know if it's just that recession that they expect. But Amy Baker, you know, is been the state's economist for a long time, the top economist for the state, and has been pretty on it. So we'll see.
Got it.
Christie, if I might, there are just a couple bills I wanted to flag for you all, the city and impact. So the first is let's see if I can remember. As soon as you compliment me for remembering all the numbers, I'm forgetting. But House Bill 991 and the Senate Bill is 1242, which is on community redevelopment agencies, CRAs. The state has had this new, not new, but as a current posture, that CRAs are just slush funds for cities. And the bills would sunset all existing CRAs by 2045 and prohibit new debt or projects from being put into place after June 30th of this year. So we are obviously concerned about that. You know, we have the 3 CRAs that have done the pier, the gas plant, and then the South St. Pete CRA, Tropicana Field, I should say. It's a priority of the speaker, we're being told, just because the House bill only has 2 committees of reference. The Senate is a bit cooler on that, so we're trying to keep it that way. But we've communicated with Rep. Cross and Rep. Cheney, you know, that we do important work out of these CRAs. We don't treat them as slush funds. If the legislature wants to put more restrictions on what they can be used for, or oversight, that's fine. Our big concern, though, is we budget for our CRAs year by year. So effectively, this would end our ability to operate those. Again, you know, we'll see where if the chambers actually come together on that, but that's one I did want to flag. The other is SB 420, which is basically the state's DEI preemption bill. Obviously, you know, the equity, we have an Office of Equity, have done things in the city that matter. The reason I do think it's a concern for the chamber, though, is the language is pretty specific in saying that a local municipality cannot use any funds to promote, and it defines DEI as anything that would promote or provide preferential treatment to any like protected class you can think of. And so we do have some concerns about how that would impact our Office of Supplier Diversity, the work the greenhouse does, and any of our our minority and women-owned businesses. So I know there was some questions asked to follow up on how it would impact women and things like that. But that's something we're going to keep an eye on, because this is not, you know, one of those vague bills. They're making sure you can't get around it from that one. And then the last one I was thinking of, one we're supportive of, it's good, is HB 1343 and Senate Bill 1022, which is fines for public nuisance abatement. This actually gives our city more power to address nuisance properties, does some shortening on timelines when people have to address them, and increasing the amount of fines that we can charge them. So Councilmember Harding has been a part of this conversation at the city level, and we think it would make some quality of life improvements for our residents. So we're supportive of that.
Gosh. Hey, David, that's a pretty big one about the CRAs. And what I'm nervous about is it is about a South Florida bad CRA actor or two down there as well, but there's not many people that are going to come to our aid on that, because there's only a few great CRAs in the state, and they're mostly in the major urban areas, and that would be that's one of the only tools Florida has for our cities to continue to invest the way we have, and that's just a terrible precedent if we don't have our CRA, or for any city not to have a CRA. So I hope we can just tell them, hey, whatever restrictions you need to put on it, but it is a tool. You can't take out tools, especially when you're trying to rebuild a community.
Absolutely. I mean, there's few people who could speak to the value of our CRAs more than you all as a chamber. So I definitely wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, and it looks like that one, like you said, David, is only on 2 House referrals. It already passed the first committee, State Affairs Committee, State Affairs, and it's going to Commerce Committee next, but it hasn't been assigned. So we can see if we can take some action. If you hear anyways on that bill or anything else while you're up there that we can take specific action, please keep us posted.
Please.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I would just say what we've been advised is make sure that our senators know. So Hooper, DeSigley, Rousseau, make sure they know from you all that the CRAs are valuable.
David, I had one question on kind of working against the DEI bill. To give it a shorthand name. When we talk protected classes, we're talking about veterans too, because I know a lot of minority business accelerators, inclusive of women and veterans as a population. Just thinking through messaging, I know what the intent is behind the bill, but the unintended consequences to a community that has MacDill and SOCOM and CENTCOM right here for veterans that are leaving and starting a business, et cetera.
Yeah, I can't remember. I use protected classes as the catch-all.
Yeah.
I don't know if veteran was one of those defined categories. I know it was race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity. I cannot remember all of them.
No worries. What was the number on that one? I'll check it out.
SB 420.
420. Right on. Thanks.
Yeah, in our Entrepreneur Academy this year, in the session we're currently running, this cohort, we have 14 veterans from MacDill that are coming to get retrained. So we do that every day with the city in the greenhouse.
Yeah, it looks like it talks about race, color, sex, or ethnicity from the language.
That's it.
So.
Anything else from any other member questions, clarifications?
I did have one other quick thing that I meant to mention earlier, but on the museum and cultural arts funding that was vetoed last year, there was, rumblings early on in that special in February that maybe the Senate, maybe, Minority Leader Pizzo would really push on overturning that veto of that entire cultural arts and grants fund. It's kind of cooled lately. The House work group did not, find that was one of the ones that should have been overturned, right? They've only found this $5 million in that specific work. So jury's still out there, I think. There's an opportunity, but I think for the amount of money, not likely. What we heard when we were in Tallahassee last week or 2 weeks ago from Senator Rousseau was there's kind of 2 discussions unfolding right now. One, do we look in the budget this year to make them whole for last year and fund going forward, or do we just come back this year in this budget and fund them for going forward? So we'll see if that happens, but it sounds like at least fiscal year 25-26 that the funding will be restored, but not going back and making people whole.
Excellent. I think we're right at 2 o'clock. Look at that. Great timing. I appreciate everyone. Appreciate John. Appreciate David. Appreciate all the questions and all the members that are on here today. And I think this is super valuable for us to be able to share with our other members that weren't on the call today, for them to be able to take some of this information. If you really love meetings, we have our Public Policy Council meeting tomorrow. And actually, Councilmember Harding will be there. So awesome to be able to bring up that 1343, David, that you spoke about. But public policy and all of our meetings are always open to all of our members. And appreciate you all. Anything else, John, Chair?
Nothing from me. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, David, for running point.
Appreciate y'all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Great job, everyone.